Yeah. So I got you. I'll give you the perfect straw man. Why the fuck are we negotiating people's rights not to be murdered?
And I mean, it's as I said in my opening.
Why
this
are
is
rights
just,
being
This
negotiated?
is
What
all
the
this
fuck?
is it's just
Why
word
not?
salad, right? And constantly you say, "Oh, you just can't imagine it." Like it's literally
Not
the
word
same thing as
salad.
arguing with communists. You just can't imagine it in the way we're talking about. No, this is exactly if you take away the state's monopoly on force and having
We never
sort
said
of
that.
state. That is what you said. That's what you've said the entire time. You
No,
just
it's
don't
not.
imagine
We've
it. You've
never
only
said
heard
that
Whenever
once.
we make a
Like,
point, you
there's
just say
no
that we're not
reason.
sufficiently understanding you.
Right. And just let me real quick, I'll just be 15 more seconds.
Because you're making
Like,
claims
the
that
problem
aren't
is
what we
you're
claim.
isolating problems and saying things are so bad right now. There are problems. No one disagrees with that. And then you say, so we're going to have this radical departure. And yet it only takes a short amount of time to realize, no, this radical departure is going to exacerbate all of the problems you're talking about. And then your answer to that's, no, you just can't imagine it. I mean, it's nonsense. It's
You're telling me you
it's
can't
nonsense.
imagine it. And that's fine. But
No,
let
I'm
me
asking you to
explain.
ask the questions, and then we're telling you answers to those
But
things.
the answers you've given aren't functional, right? Like the answer you've given, well, the homeless person would be able to sue because there'd be some law firm somewhere that would take on the homeless person's case. One, that would be more likely to happen in the system
Well,
we have
probably.
now, rather than a system where you literally have tens of thousands of codes of laws across the country, and those laws are being enforced strictly through privatization and people that have the money being able to enforce it. We can see right now in our current system that there's all sorts of laws that people that like currency manipulation. There's, we saw the financial collapse of 2008. You'll say, well, that's all indicative of the current system. Yes, but that thing would be infinitely worse if we give power to say those that have more money get more enforcement mechanism through the law. Yes, there are problems with our current system, but it would be infinitely worse under your system.
Just to try to move this along just a little bit, Rob, when you say what your answer will be is blank, I don't want a bunch of building of straw mans that we have to untangle. So let's try to be as concise as we can with the language. We've got 2-on-2. I want to try to get to the heart of these things as fast as we can. Go ahead, guy.
Yeah, like I'd love to explain this to you guys, but it seems like you guys are trying your hardest to prevent us from explaining anything. You're just saying your answer is going to be this. You have no answer to this. You can't explain blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, we can. Just let us. All right. I mean, if you want to know how this works. Okay. So a firm is considering whether to give people the right to not be murdered, let's say. And they'll look at, okay, how much will people pay for the right to not be murdered? And also look at what will be the cost of enforcing this right. What will be the expenses to us of making sure that our customers don't get murdered? And if the revenue that they'll get from customers paying for that right is more than the cost of enforcing it, then they'll probably offer it as part of their package of rights. Right? Pretty simple. Through a whole bunch of decisions like that, you'll get a set of
the problem is
you're
talking about something as simplistic like as murder, right? So let's say that instead, in California,
and other things would be more
Silicon Valley has so
it's
much
the
money.
same basic idea.
No, okay. So if you're let's say
give us your perfect straw man. Give us your perfect. No, just give us. You're saying give us the perfect example of why you think this would be
you
difficult.
gotta let him interact. You don't know if he's strawmanning or not. You cut him off.
No, I'm not accusing him of strawman. I'm asking him to. I'm saying give us the perfect example of a situation
I got you.
You think won't work.
Yeah. So I got you. I'll give you the perfect straw man. Why the fuck are we negotiating people's rights not to be murdered when we can extrapolate out as a public externality through taxes a relative guarantee to not be murdered? That way we remove the profit incentive over whether or not people are going to get fucking murdered. Why
negotiating
ever
the market's
trust?
a better?
Why would we?
I mean, we're negotiating our rights now.
Right?
Political
us to a private
counter.
It's not like our rights are given to us from the
appreciate.
sky. Like we have politics and conflict and people arguing over what our rights are and negotiating them. So
this is where last username and I.
Why is that so?
This is where last username and I disagree on how fundamentally I think look at rights, because I don't necessarily believe that rights are negotiable in that response. I would actually say that you, as the statist living in America, are negotiating your rights by saying that the Constitution and the government affords your rights, and that political processes are what determine what your rights are and what your rights aren't. And the Supreme Court and all of the ways the Constitution has been changed in constitutional amendments and so forth have determined what those rights are and aren't. I subscribe to a theory or a philosophy that rights are objective, that there is a natural law, and that I believe that the state violates those things, and I believe that it is an immoral system for that. I find things like taxation to be against natural law because it says that the state owns a portion of my body and a portion of my labor, right? And so that is the main reason why
Can I ask
I
you about that?
advocate
Because
for a
that's like a
voluntaristic system.
it's a fundamental axiomatic, like it's a fundamental position.
Right, which is
And
what you
so
asked for.
you use,
Yeah.
no, and I appreciate that, but you use the term natural when
Mhm.
describing it,
Mhm.
and I promise you, I'm not trying to straw man, but it seems like this perspective is rigidly individualistic. But what I would say is that if you look at history, it's not a history of individuals, and it's not purely a history of collectives. It's a history of the interplay between individuals and collectives. And if you look at like people,
Mhm.
as a whole, whether you're talking about like great rulers or individual citizens, it's always been a negotiation between the private and the public. So, what in natural history tells you that you are a island that doesn't have to negotiate with your surroundings or the power structures that are around you? What about history or naturalism tells you that you are an autonomous individual free from the powers and concerns of others?
Yeah, so two things. A bunch of things. One, it is individualistic, and the reason is because collectives don't have actions, individuals have actions, and they make up collectives. The individual is the smallest denominator here, the individual conscious. So that would be the answer to that. It's just one to say that the collective is the important thing here is just anti-rational. From my personal
I'm not
position, you might
saying that. I'm
disagree.
saying it's the interplay between the two.
Right. And when you say naturalistic, I think you're misunderstanding what natural law is. Natural law just means an objective ethic. It's an objective law. So it logically can't flow. So for example, saying that God gives us certain rights or certain laws that we must follow would also be a natural law, right? It is an objective. I come from a position that we can discover objective law through rationality and through logic.
So what about history or your rationality or
It's not a
your
historical
rational
analysis.
analysis of history? What's that?
It's not a historical analysis.
Why wouldn't it be if you could look to history for the way that humans have existed in the past and you're using your rational mind to figure out how human beings interact with society, and you've
Because that's
decided
not
that's
what
something that
rational
human
means.
beings okay well
That's not how
this is an
logic
important
works.
okay well this is an important well wait please explain to me how logic works.
Right. Logic is a system of equations, and in like I
Man,
can't
we're
fucking
getting way
define.
My equation.
Hang on, we're getting way off into the fucking weeds.
This
I'd
is
like to
not.
bring
This is fundamental.
Well,
This
it
is
could be,
fundamental.
hang on. It could be, hang on. It could be that it's fundamental, right?
Mhm.
But then if it is fundamental, tie it into how it is fundamental.
Okay, let me try to see. Let me try to. What we're saying is what I said at the beginning, that you could talk about these things in theory and on paper, but Connor's making the point, like, we see the history of human interactions and how humans actually act in the real world. And basically to say, well, logic doesn't work like that. It's external of that. No, because there's a fundamental flaw in the logic then if we could never point to this being existence in human history, or if we could point to why the existence of human interactions through history show that these sorts of things wouldn't be possible.
When you're asking me for the rationale, right, that is occurring in the vacuum of understanding ethics, and you want a historical analysis, or that didn't happen in this portion of history, therefore it's not right, that actually is a logical fallacy, right? That's an appeal to history.
Let me make it specific. Like, you asked for a specific example for me. So let me say this. You hear all the time about like these towns like in New York when Amazon was coming in, right? And they were going to have so many jobs there. So let's take a town like that. Now we can see
AOC.
Right. Yeah. So we can see the tech companies and, their beliefs. So let's say that Amazon has a town in some small town in New York, right? And the entire economy is built on the corporation of Amazon. And so they, in your system, they control the local police or mercenaries or insurance company or whatever you want to call them. They control it. And they say, yeah, murder's bad and free speech is good and all that stuff. But we don't consider it free speech to be able to criticize Amazon. We don't consider, real quick, we don't consider it free speech for you to be able to talk negatively about the positions of leadership or the police or the insurance companies that are
Your
here.
boss.
And we also don't want anyone using any other services in our that compete with us in our why, and we're allowed to enforce that through violence if necessary. And if you fight back and it escalates, well, we don't consider that murder because we're just defending our legal system that we.
Dude, how many questions are you going to ask?
Well,
Like,
it's
That's all
how
one
I
question,
deep are you
buddy.
going to go down the
I
rabbit
don't
hole of an
understand
analogy?
if I can address that real quick. I don't know if you have a mind that's capable of understanding. That's not multiple questions. That's explaining a scenario and asking through
Right, but I
multiple
already
factors of what that
disagree with
scenario
the
looks like. You not being able to handle it mentally and saying how
Rob
many
Noerr,
questions are you going to
Rob Noerr,
ask?
don't
Like, that's not a good
patronize
look
me.
for you.
But Rob Noerr, don't patronize me. The problem
Don't
is
patronize
that
me.
at the beginning of it, right, you're asking me to walk with you in a scenario that we don't believe is a rational scenario to begin with. And then you go deeper and deeper and deeper
Why?
into creating this dystopian future and then go, well, what about this scenario, this dystopian model that I've presented? Please explain how it works under this dystopia.
Scott,
So I
then
find it
why?
hilarious.
We're getting,
Well,
hang
no,
on,
no,
we're getting
Rob,
right
Rob.
to it. Counterpoints is right. He asked the perfect question, why? So let's
Okay,
dive into
so
it.
first of all, monopolistic tendencies are already worse under the state than they are under anarchism. Number one, so the likelihood that you have the company town is less likely to exist under anarcho-capitalism than it is in the United States of America.
Okay, but Scott, I already have a problem with your logic there because if we look at the most free, economically free times in American history, if we look at the late 19th and early 20th century, then basically what we see is we see monopolies forming and them using vertical and horizontal monopolization in order to beat out competition. So
Yeah,
how?
see, the problem with saying that was the most economically free time is that was also a time where the Pinkertons and moonlighting police officers and the National Guard.
Oh, you mean
via
private
the
police
state,
and private security?
Well, the National Guard wasn't private police. The National Guard being brought in to beat the living shit out of people protesting for working conditions because they weren't allowed to go against a system of monopolies that were directly supported and funded by the state. It was some of the least free market times in our history because the state was giving out mining rights, they were giving out railroad rights, they were supporting them when the labor unions tried to strike or tried to have wildcat strikes. They would intentionally put mail onto carts.
We
so
have
that
to
they
go
could
back to this
stop them.
point, buddy. We have to go back to this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. You said it was the most economically free time, and that proves me wrong. And I'm just showing you all the ways the state used violence to enforce those monopolies.
Okay, but give me a second because the way that you disagree with my, our criticisms of your worldview, I disagree with your description of reality. Okay, so on one hand, I see what you're saying, where the arm of the state was used in a corrupt way in order to enforce private interest, and I understand that. But basically, my criticism of your perspective would be that, like, by removing the state, all you're doing is you're removing an institution that has to maintain some level of appearance of non-corruption and public interest. Whereas as soon as you make it purely private, where is the incentive to be non-corrupt and where is the incentive not to represent private interest, particularly when you're being hired directly by that private interest? And I won't talk for too much longer because I want you to address that, because my recollection of history is that the Pinkertons were private police hired to get dirt on industrial rivals and beat the shit out of people who were organizing for fucking workers' rights and shit. So what part of my assessment of that part of reality is incorrect?
No, you're 100% right that the Pinkertons were a private security firm that were hired to do that, right? You're also 100% right if you were to go one step further and say that the moonlighting police officers were hired by corporations and companies. I'm simply saying that they were able to do these injustices because they were given power and authority from the state. The state looked the other way when these things happened. And anytime a labor movement tried to fight for any amounts of rights or go against these monopolies that were created by the state used its own violence to quash those things. And I just wouldn't call that the most free market capitalist.
So what is Steelman? No. Hold on, because we're almost at consensus.
Probably the Republic of Cospaya from 1440 to 1826.
Okay, but I want to ask this because I feel like I could almost understand a certain perspective. So
Mhm.
without the state giving the Pinkertons and the National Guard and the moonlighting police officers the authority of the badge, then in your system, I'm asking this because I'm almost here.
Mhm.
Basically, in your system, the workers, because they would be able to outsource their security as well, their security firms or their private firms would have as much authority to enforce security and nonviolence as the Pinkertons, and as a result, it wouldn't be a one-sided fight. Do I do I understand that correctly, or am I making shit up in my head?
No, you're not making shit up. I would say that that is right, though it's obviously not the whole picture. And I'll let last username fill in. I'm sure he has some ideas. I don't want to monopolize the stage.
Well, okay. So I don't know. Talking about the Pinkertons, I'm not sure if that's really analogous to what we're talking about. I want to go back to what
Yeah.
Rob asked about Walmart. You said Walmart wants to stop everyone from saying bad things about Walmart. Okay. If they want that right, the right to stop other people from bad mouthing Walmart, they're going to have to pay for that. That means they're going to have to pay the cost of, first of all, enforcing that law, which is probably going to be pretty expensive. But also, they're bidding against everybody else who wants the right, presumably, to criticize Walmart and are willing to pay for that right. So, this is going to be a pretty expensive right for Walmart to get, because not only have to pay to actually stop people from speaking, but they have to outbid what other people are willing to pay to have the right to speak.
But it doesn't.
It's whatever Walmart wants in that case. There's probably a cheaper way to get it than using force to stop people from bad mouthing Walmart, especially since everyone's going to know that.
No, the point, it's just one example. We could keep going with that example. By the way, I said Amazon. Another example. No, I get you. That's no big deal. But okay. but nonetheless, you can see in that particular area, they're already going to win the outbidding war because they control the local economy in that area. I don't think so. And why wouldn't they? So if I'm reliant on Walmart in your example for my job, and I say, you know what, I'm going to take my business. What am I going to do? And this is another problem that just doesn't make sense. So you can have all of these regions, and the people with the most money in those regions set the law as they see fit and set the enforcement as they see fit. What do you do if you don't like it? You'd say, well, people will vote with their feet. So we're just going to have people moving, picking up roots and moving anytime they want. Town A says Town A says we allow.
By the way, we have historical examples of those.
So again, when you're not actually reacting to the statement that last username made, right?
Sure.
What he's talking, well, maybe, but you're doing it tangentially, and I don't think maybe we can dig into it a little deeper, right? When he's saying it's more expensive, what he's saying is that the company has now incurred a cost, right? Under our current system of the state, we have regulatory capture. We have systems like tariffs that allow people that are have their portfolios or their money or their businesses more diversified. We have tax systems that benefit the rich. We have judicial systems that specifically disproportionately help those that have the ability to pay for better systems, whereas arbitration tends to lean more heavily towards those who are poorer because of the way in which they're more the financial incentive is usually to actually go towards those with less capital. So we have a lot of systems in place in the state that support this thing that you have, right? But when you take away and you strip away those things, what you're left with is market competition. And so when a business chooses to do something that a lot of people don't like and don't want, and they start to incur a cost because of that, because they're trying to enforce this lack of free speech in that area, what it does is it creates a market void, because whatever product it is that they are selling or whatever it is that they're providing, other companies that won't infringe on your free speech, other company town, for example, or another town very close by, or even an area within that community, right? They have the ability to compete against that company, and that company is incurring additional costs by trying to do something that nobody wants.
That's not true,
Scott,
right? And you can see monopolization would mean like so.
What's not true?
We're talking. Well, listen, the cost wouldn't outweigh the benefit that they could get in many scenarios, and like we could do this easily. Like we're talking about things like products like Amazon, Walmart, and things like that. How about who controls the land that food's produced on? How about who controls the water pipes and things like that? Let's say that, you know, or even if you're talking about something like Silicon Valley and the tech company, you get like a monopoly of a company that basically everyone just through ease of access or through whatever reason is basically using one product 90% of the time, like Alphabet that owns Google.
Yeah, but that's the state.
Please,
again, that's the state.
Please let me finish. So if Alphabet decides that they're going to use corrupt corporate practices to go after all of their competitors and crush them, and they're providing a service that basically people need. Sorry, go ahead.
Finish. You gotta let him finish. No, finish, Rob.
I wanted to finish, but I wanted to be clear too. I want to understand what you're saying.
Oh, okay, what's the question?
Corrupt corporate practices. Be specific.
Right. So there's corporate espionage, corporate attacks, stealing of IP. These things occur all the time, right? And it would be even more incentive. Right now, there's at least some framework to say that these things are outlawed, and there's some way. And again, you're just saying, well, things exist now that are bad, but magically, any scenario you give in the future, we'll just ignore and say, no, that's dystopian. It wouldn't happen. The reality is these things would happen.
If the espionage is illegal,
please. The reality is these things would happen even more and would encourage even more monopolies. And when those monopolies get to the point where people basically rely on them for their service, whether it be something like building cars or tech, where we see one company controlling 90% of the market share, or more fundamental things like food and water, then the cost that incurs to keeping that monopoly.
But again, Rob, you're breaking our argument and then strawmanning it. Like, if you want to know what would happen in the case of espionage, you can ask that, but you didn't. You just said, well, espionage would happen and there'd be no law against it. And blah, blah, blah.
I'll ask you. I'll leave you answer real quick, but I'll just say this for 30 seconds. This is childishness. This is absolute childishness, because every time we point out real scenarios that would logically progress from your system, you say, no, we're able to explain it in a way that it wouldn't happen. You haven't asked us. Where are we supposed to sit here? So this is the debate. We sit here and go, you're right, this is a perfect system. We'll just ask you questions. Corporate espionage, and then you'll explain for 20 minutes how it's impossible to happen under your system. Wouldn't happen. And if it did happen, noble, benevolent insurance companies would step in using their mercenaries to make sure.
There's no reason there would be
it's just silly.
any more
you haven't
likely to
asked
happen
me.
in
You
the
haven't
current
asked me.
system.
I have a special version of the state that
Someone
would be able
commits
to
corporate espionage, you use your rights of person agency to go and
real quick, just
pursue
okay, hold on, Rob.
actions.
Yeah.